Hello and welcome to the 10th session of the World University Summit. We're very excited to be joined by distinguished speakers from all around the world, in fact, today. The session will be focused on paving the way forward, strategic collaboration among universities in times of uncertainty. And I'll give a brief about that subject shortly, a very short brief. However, I want to introduce our distinguished speakers before I do that. We are joined by Professor Dominic Micklewright, who I must acknowledge is dialing in very early from the United Kingdom, and he's representing the University of Essex, and he's the Dean of Partnerships there. We're also joined by Mr. Aditya Malkani, who's South and East Asia representative of the Association of Commonwealth Universities based in India. Professor Natcha is dialing in from Thailand, and we're very happy to have her join us here today. She's the Vice President for Strategic Planning and Innovation, as well as Global Engagement from her university. And I welcome also Mr. Kurt Larsen, who's a Senior Education Specialist from the World Bank, who's had decades-long experience in education, including at the World Bank, OECD, and prior to that, for the government of Denmark. So a big welcome for our very international panel here today. And it's quite fitting because we are talking about international strategic partnerships and how really the uncertainties of today's world have impacted those kind of strategic partnerships. It's not news to anyone that we're in the middle of a global pandemic, which has affected us all, both personally and professionally. And as institutions, as higher education institutions, it's had a great impact on the way we do business, on the way we teach, on the way we conduct research. And really today's session is focused on how do we plan and implement strategic partnerships in times of uncertainty such as this. As alluded to before, it's not new to anyone that we've had to innovate and adapt to this uncertain world and this changing environment. And in many respects, that's forced our hand in terms of moving to the virtual world, rather than traveling to the other side of the world, both as a student in terms of student mobility, or as academics for conferences and research meetings, or even strategic meetings for collaborations and partnerships. Well, typically and historically, we've done that in person, and we've hopped on an airplane and we've visited another institution in another country. We have not been able to do that because of the times we're in. So, it's very clear that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound impact on the way we do business in higher education. And really today's session is focused on how do we plan in such uncertain times, both now and moving forward. How do we develop, plan, and implement sustainable strategic partnerships all around the world? And as I've said, we're joined by people throughout Europe and the UK and different parts of Asia today to talk about this important issue. And I might get the ball rolling by inviting a couple of speakers to address what does strategic partnership mean to them in the higher education industry, and what have the constraints of the COVID-19 pandemic meant for strategic partnerships to their institution or to the institutions that they represent. I might invite you, Professor Natcha, to take a lead on these two questions, please.
Thank you, Professor Shaun, and greeting from Chulalongkorn University, Bangkok, Thailand. We are very pleased indeed to meeting our global partners again online, even though online, but we still have hearts-to-hearts feeling for each other. Well, for us, when we talk about strategic partnership, which is very good question indeed, because it involves a number of things. It involves planning and it involves management. And the word strategic itself, it encompasses the scope and the depth of involvement, as well as durations of partnerships and commitment of resources that we're spending on that successful partnership. And our presidents and the team has really emphasized on avoiding an empty MOU, which means we have lots of MOU, but if it is not active, that is not good. So how we can utilize our time and resource meaningfully and effectively. So we should first understand and identify key to successful partnerships, which definitely it should come with having a desired common goals. So if our partners are aligned with the same common goals, and definitely the interest and enthusiasm of individual players to that partnership and trust in the system, in the partnership systems are the key to success. And hence, having a strategic partnership should be selective. And the selected partner should be in the areas that complement and enhance one another's strengths to achieve our desired common goals, such as in higher education, of course, our key person is our students. We want to prepare our students to be future leaders who have social minded, who think and do for the society and global common goods. And the second part is on research and innovation. We want to develop impactful research and innovation towards sustainability, which today we are very lucky that UN SDG goals set a very clear 17 goals. So that could really help all of us to align our time and resources. And also with uncertainties, with the pandemic that we are facing. So how we can collaborate and partner to combating with today's pandemic. And when we're looking at the concept of Chula International Strategic Partnership is hence to strengthen our existing collaboration with other universities and also private sector. We identify areas of our strength and our partner strength and whether these strengths could come together and contributing to our desired common goals, which it is not only a bilateral collaborations, but also including multilateral collaboration. And during the time of uncertainties, we do believe that working collectively rather than competitively will benefit all parties. And right now, there are hundreds of research work that we have been collaborating with our international partners. Of course, the goal that we are trying to achieve is UN SDG goal. And yet, there are several other research areas which are we are still looking for our partners. And Chulalongkorn University is definitely always welcome the collaborations from public, private, and the university sector for the best benefits of our students and for the best benefits of our citizens and of our society. So that is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Natcha. Quite an inspiring start, but it's much more than just empty MOUs. There's something more tangible and substantive to it. And that gives us a great springboard to start the conversation. I might hand it over to Kurt, actually, to speak from a World Bank perspective and to think more broadly. What does strategic mean to you, and how have times of uncertainty changed things?
Thank you so much, Shaun. It's a pleasure to be part of this very inspiring webinars and conference that you are doing online with Jindal University. I would like to talk a little bit about what the consequences have been on this pandemic situation for a university globally. The World Bank is working with the Ministry of Education in India on basically finding out what are the implementations strategies for the national education policy that the government of India has launched. And in this context, of course, the COVID-19 situation also plays a key role, not only for India, but for the whole world. And what we have seen is that student and teacher mobility has really slowed down because of the travel restriction, the health situation, and so on. So what we have seen is that globally, student and teacher mobility has really slowed down. And what we might see in the very short run is that student really seeks to more conservative options and make choices according to national and international policy, health and safety, as well as what they can get in terms of academic support. In the more medium term consequences is that both the higher education institutions, but also the families and individuals, they might not be able to afford in the same way international mobility. So what we see is that institutions are really struggling economically. Not all of them, but some institutions which are not able of taking advantage or really adapting to the pandemic situation might be in difficulties, but not those universities who are really very actively using online possibilities for reaching out to students abroad and in their own country. What I think we are going to see on a more medium and long term is that universities will concentrate more on doing good online and virtual exchange programs. Also, maybe in some cases, if the universities have branch campuses in the other countries, they would use these campuses to reach out to students. And also, I'm aware that Jindal University, that they have partnered with the Arizona State Universities on micro campuses which is a partnership where students have access to another university's teachers through online, and the home university is very much following up with this international partner to do flipped classrooms where students watch lectures outside of their class and can use class time to work collaborative with their professor in their home country. So these are what we call micro campuses, and which is something new, which I think will grow substantially. So what I think is that we will see more of online branch campuses and mini campuses where the knowledge is coming to the students in their country, rather than students are moving physically to another country. This might be something which will it's already happening, but something that we will see more of because of the pandemic. So my message is really, number one message is really that we will see more of these online micro campuses as in a sort of post-mobility period, where the knowledge will be exported rather than to import students. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Larsen. Particularly the point about, alternatives to physical mobility, which has really been one of the greatest impacts of the pandemic, and highlighting a number of options in terms of, the trade or the exchange of knowledge rather than physical mobility is a really nice way that you illustrated that. I might hand it over now to Professor Dominic at the University of Essex to talk about, from your perspective, what are strategic partnerships at your institutions? What do they mean, and how have they been impacted by these times of uncertainty?
Thank you, Shaun. I mean, firstly, I would just very much agree with some of the points made by both of the previous panel members. I mean, one of the things that's always occurred to me in trying to build partnerships is that the distinction between something that is strategic and, shall we say, not strategic is not clear cut. It's certainly not a binary issue, because to make it a binary issue really doesn't take into consideration the time and maturation that a partnership may need to go through. And very often I've found that for something to be a strategic partnership, it largely depends on the appetite and alignment, really, of both organisations that are involved in it, or if it's a network, then of the organisations involved in it. And in some cases, the right way to progress with a partnership, I think, is to start with something quite small, perhaps a friendship agreement or an MOU, but then to avoid the situation that was described by Professor Natcha, you really need to have an associated, agreed set of actions and plan to convert that into something that involves collaborating, rather than, as to coin the phrase, it becoming an empty MOU. So I think that's really, really very important. It doesn't always work out that way, I have to say. I mean, this isn't an exact science. Sometimes partnerships start with the thought that it can grow into something much more significant, and it sometimes doesn't necessarily happen. And that can be also because I think the priorities of one or both organisations does evolve over time, and that's often not talked about in partnership development. And where the potential for a partnership can be very evident when you first start talking. Actually, as you get further into your negotiations and discussions, it can become quite clear, actually, that there's going to be considerable limitations to what you can jointly achieve together. But for others, sometimes there's a serendipitous, flip to this, which is that you start with a partnership that you think will be quite small, and then sometimes it can, mature and grow and flourish into something very, very significant. So I think that one of the most critical things to do in trying to develop a partnership is for both organisations to take sufficient time and to be sufficiently candid with each other about what it is they want out of the relationship. And if you don't do that, really, I don't really see that a partnership will be sustainable, because what you're going to end up with is an imbalance between the partners. Very likely, you're going to probably end up with something that isn't sustainable and will probably fizzle out. So I think that at the very earliest stages, the critical point is the depth and detail and effort that both sides put into finding out what each other wants, and then trying to create a partnership around common territory. So in terms of whether a partnership is strategic or not, I think time is the real judge of that, because planning a partnership doesn't necessarily mean it is strategic. I think it becomes strategic over time when it's actually delivering against either, well, it has to, and I would underline this, it has to be delivering against both institutions' wider strategic objectives. It has to be having an additive effect to both organisations. If it's only having that effect on one organisation, very likely it won't last. So that is what I consider to be a strategic partnership, one that is functioning like that, and for which there is a great shared understanding and the potential for sustainable future in the work that you do together.
Thank you, Dominic. I'll ask Aditya the same question, in fact. From your perspective, given the institutions you work with in the Commonwealth, more broadly, can you answer that? What strategic means to them? But also, importantly, has the answer to that changed because of the impact of the pandemic?
Sure. Thanks, Shaun. And let me join my co-panelists in saying what a pleasure it is to be here. The Association of Commonwealth Universities and OP Jindal Global University have had a very strong relationship over the years, and therefore opportunities to nurture that are always welcome. And I think this here itself is an example of a strategic partnership where fundamentally strategic partners are those that help each other grow and help each other make strides towards achieving each other's objectives. And I think that is fundamentally the key, which is it's very simple rules of trade in a way, which is if I have what can help you grow and achieve your objectives, and if you have what can help me grow and achieve my objectives, that's a perfect match there. And then, of course, there's many other factors that come into the picture, which is a constantly changing environment. We're in a highly uncertain world, as the last 1.5 years have shown us. You also have sustainability and climate issues coupled with the ravages of the pandemic, which have been, only being highlighted more and more with each passing week, and therefore, those institutions which can resource their strategic partnerships well, those institutions which can appoint champions or ambassadors to nurture their partnerships are the partnerships that can actually build up in a healthy and sustainable way. Having said that, things are not much easier in the online world. Of course, it's quite easy to switch on one's laptop and connect with one another and have conversations, but I've noticed that conversations are far more transactional when you're doing them across a screen. One is not able to build the same sorts of relationships one would be able to build, drinking chai in a canteen of an Indian university, or let's say going to theatre at London's West End together, because it's those sorts of relationships that evolve into personal friendships. And I think that at the end of the day, we're all human beings with emotion, with feeling. And when those strong personal bonds can be built between academics, between professional services staff, is when relationships become that much easier to negotiate and move on. On the flip side, there are great advantages also to working in the online world, which is, of course, reduced costs, reduced carbon emissions, which are so important. And I think, there's three key words that come to mind when one thinks of strategic partnership. One is faith, the other is trust, and the third, of course, which binds these two together, is people. So I think the nature of strategic partnerships is really down to the people that are engaged in developing them. As an association that brings institutions together and plays a facilitation role, we've noticed that those bonds which have been developed over the years coming into the pandemic have been strengthened during this period of time apart. New relationships have also been established. And again, universities that are part of networks such as the ACU or other associations, there's already a comfort factor because we're part of the same group. And therefore, it's a good way to initiate and ignite the early shoots of a partnership, and then take it forward from there. But I would go back to these three pillars of faith, trust, and people time and again, because it's these three factors, I think, that enable partnerships to develop the momentum that they need.
Thanks, Aditya. We'll certainly come back to those three pillars. I think there's a few questions that can come out in terms of follow-up. In the meantime, Professor Natcha, I might go back to you and pick up on something you said in terms of, I guess, the key stakeholders when we're looking at a strategic partnership. And it's I mean, the obvious focal point that you spoke of is the student. You also talked about, however, research and innovation as an important facet. So I want to sort of put a question to you about these two facets, and that is, how can you give an example of how your institution has had to pivot, let's say, in this online virtual environment, and has successfully planned and implemented a strategic partnership or collaboration for the benefit of, on the one hand, students, and on the other hand, research and innovation?
Thank you, Professor Shaun. This is a very good question again. Well, as I mentioned, there are two main missions of the university. First is to nurture our future's leader, or our next generation leader, who has a social minded and who could contribute to the global common goods. So when we're looking at during the pandemic, the student learning process did affect a lot, because when we're talking about the best learning experiences, of course, people to people, human touch is important. And when we are looking at nurturing our future's leader, projects-based learning come into play. Innovation projects come into play. So this part, we found difficulty at the beginning, because at the university, we have innovation hub and a number of project-based learning going on in the campus. However, during the pandemic, instead of face-to-face, we have to change that into online by using the technology. So we try a number of ways, and we found successfully. We did organizing what we call engaging futures with the UN and UNESCO, and the UNDP with the UNUS Foundation about a year ago, when the pandemic just started. And in that programs, we found successfully, we use everything online, like what we're conducting right now as a webinar, but we're organizing the process using face-to-face process, but changing that into an online platforms. We found that it's quite successful, and it's more cost and resource effectively than using face-to-face interaction. Because when everything online, you can do it anywhere, anytime, and you can organize it to the best way to the students. During that project, we found that we could engage our undergrad students around the world, about 400 plus students involving in that project, and more than 100 projects, innovation projects submitting to that programs. So that is one of the way we improving or finding way to coping with the pandemic. And the other one is a student exchange. As we know, that student exchange is one of the key activities that we all do. So what we have done in the past is we are collaborating with APRU, which is one of our major university network, the Association of Pacific Rims University. So, the board come up with the new programs called APRU Virtual Student Exchange Program since last year. And we try that program together with the network that we are working with, and we found excellence. These programs provide our students with international experiences. Students can take course more than one universities and internationally around our network, and they can study any place in the world during this time of uncertainties. And definitely without the collaborations and partnership that we have, it is impossible that this will happen. So I do very much appreciating our partnership network that we have that could help us coming through this pandemic. This is the first part of Future Leader. And then the second part of impactful research and innovation. Again, we use online technologies, and of course, because of people-to-pupil collaboration, our faculty member build relationship, build friendship, have done research work together with our partner globally, and that still continue. But instead of face-to-face and have to travel, now it's coming to an online. So that is some examples, and because of the UN SDG goal that even help us align our common goals. Because in the past, the project is like quite fragmented, right? It may cluster into a research area, but the goal itself is not clear. But when UN SDG come, it does help a lot. I mean, all the research project now can link to the UN SDG goal or how we contribute to a global impact. So these are the two main things that I would like to briefly explain. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Natcha. And in many respects, that's a fantastic segue back to Dominic, who spoke about appetite and alignment as a key theme of a successful strategic partnership. So Dominic, I might go back to you on this one. In terms of measuring success, and you alluded to this, however, measuring success of a strategic partnership, in a nutshell, what makes a partnership a success, strategic or not? What makes a partnership a success? And has that measure changed because of the changing circumstances?
So thank you, Shaun. I mean, one of the things that I think is really important in the success of a partnership is having a very clear focus on what you can do rather than what you cannot. Very often, I think, having developed a lot of partnerships over the years, there's a natural tendency to try to explain what can't be done in a bilateral partnership meeting, rather than really trying to focus on what can be done. One of the biggest barriers actually to partnerships, I think, is or to overcome in terms of doing things that you can actually achieve, is understanding different contextual and regulatory sort of frameworks, really, I suppose, in a sense, and misalignment between those across physical borders, across political borders, can be one of the challenges that you have to try to overcome. So for instance, if you just think about the regulatory differences in what is possible from a partnership point of view or a higher education point of view in one country compared to another, in trying to collaborate with universities across that border, you have to somehow try and come up with a solution that satisfies not one set of education regulatory rules, but very often two. So success, really, I think it also comes back to having a shared understanding of the context in which both organisations are working properly. It wouldn't be the first time that two universities have tried to collaborate together and have gone a long way down the negotiation process and the planning process, only then to realise that there's a regulatory constraint that is impeding their plans, and that can be incredibly frustrating. So I think success really is partly about very much understanding each other's perspective, each other's operating context, regulatory constraints within which they work, and then on that basis, developing your plans from that. That will certainly help, because it will mean that you're able to move more quickly towards a sustainable and successful partnership.
Thanks, Dominic. I might move to Aditya on a similar question, but with a practical focus. When we're looking at, your third limb of your three themes was people. So when we're focusing on people, let's look at one particular aspect of that stakeholder group: university leaders, the executive leadership of a university, associate deans, vice chancellors. What practical steps do these people need to consider when implementing a real strategic partnership across borders? And again, we're focusing on mutual benefit for both partners. What practical steps do these leaders need to keep in mind?
Thanks, Shaun. I think a very, very relevant point to raise and discuss. So the role of academic champions in strategic partnerships, of course, is well recognized and well established. But this point about the role of university leaders, in our opinion, is also phenomenally important, because it really is the leaders that that would need to ensure that the vision documents of an institution focus on certain strategic developments and priorities and partnerships. It's really up to the leaders also to ensure that these strategic documents and the strategic vision of the institution gives due weightage and importance to select partnerships, so that it's not just those that are involved with the partnership from its very inception stages, but others as well in the institution that then can play a role in contributing to the overall development of a strategic partnership. I think providing adequate resources into making sure a partnership is able to sustain itself over a longer period of time is another very important role that university leaders have to play. I think finally, making sure that as a university leader, one is able to devote a certain amount of time and interest personally to the extent possible to nurturing strategic partnerships is also phenomenally important. And this could be even to the extent of simply being present at a symbolic event, whether it's an MOU signing that brings institutions together and formalizes relationships, or whether it's in the old world when one was actually getting on planes and traveling to different cities and countries, making sure that if you're in a particular country where you have a strategic partner, to make that effort to actually travel to that partner and see them and have a cup of tea with your counterpart. I think these aspects are phenomenally important from a university leader's perspective. But I would say the most important of these three factors that I've mentioned is really making sure that strategic partnerships find a place in university vision documents, just so that they get the respect that they deserve.
Thanks, Aditya. And in many ways, aligning with what Dominic was talking about finding that focal point and that alignment. So some great consistencies there. Thank you so much. Kurt, I've got a question for you, and I want to go on a little bit of a different tangent, perhaps through a World Bank lens. And that is whether the pandemic and everything that comes with that has forced or encouraged institutions when looking at a strategic partnership to, and in fact, in line with what Professor Natcha was talking about, to focus on, I suppose, development goals, to focus on the bigger picture, not just institutional goals, but goals with more of a social impact. And whether that is the case in practice, and from a practical perspective, how can two institutions which are globally focused implement those kinds of projects that are social minded and socially focused?
No, it's a very good question, Shaun. I mean, there's no doubt that universities do play a role in, for example, addressing the issue of how do we develop a vaccine for the COVID situation. And we see a lot of universities playing a very active role with companies in actually the whole process of developing vaccines and so on. And there's no doubt that that the universities are very much aware of that this situation we have now, where in physical connections, which is the core of teaching and learning, is not very possible. So you have to be very aware of the social environment and even your local community where you're operating. And that is very important. So I think, yes, some universities are really at the forefront, collaborating internationally on the vaccine with other universities, with research institutes, and with the private sector. But at the same time, they really need to be very aware of their local communities and helping the students, parents, and so on to understand this critical situation we have here right now. I think focus on equity, social issues, but also on the opportunities, because there's no doubt that the whole biomedical area of research, teaching and learning in that area, those universities who have those skills, they have a multitude of opportunities to collaborate and get funding for developing such areas. And we have seen very much of a focus on these areas, and there's no doubt that within the next 5 years, the biomedical area will have a huge boom in collaboration between universities and with the private sector. So thank you so much for addressing these issues.
Thank you, Kurt. I mean, this has been an extremely fruitful discussion so far, and I'm conscious that we've got a really engaged audience today, and I've got with me a lot of questions, and many of which I'd like to get through before our time runs out. So I'll group a few of the themes together and potentially propose a discussant for each one. But of course, if you'd like to address it, please just let me know. So one of the themes has to do with student engagement in times of uncertainty. Now, we all know for both faculty and students, it's been an incredibly challenging time during the pandemic. And there's a sense among students, at least the individual who's put this question has phrased it as such, that there are many challenges, both from a technological perspective. Kurt, you alluded to the economic circumstances as well, both for institutions and students, but also mental and physical health during the pandemic, of course. So how do we remain sort of cognizant of these challenges, particularly issues such as Zoom fatigue or spending too much time on a computer when we're implementing partnerships and webinars such as this, online courses, online exchanges? How do we remain aware of these, but continue to engage students in interesting and innovative experiences from a partnership perspective? So I think any one of you could probably answer this question, but I might start with you, Dominic, from the perspective of your institution.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, clearly the pandemic has had a devastating effect on student mobility. This was, I think, Professor Natcha talked about that a little bit earlier on, and we do, you know, in some ways, what the pandemic has done is given us a preview of what the future could look like. It's enabled us to be able to realise what can be done without getting on a plane, but we also, in some ways, are at a very precarious transition phase, I think, in international higher education, in terms of dehumanising it. And we do need to be rather careful of that, I think, because the experience that students want from an international higher education is in part being able to immerse themselves within a different culture, to be able to interact with students from many different countries around the world, and to do that while studying for subjects that they're very passionate about. So as we move from, I suppose, the old way of doing things, where students would have traditionally got on a plane, they would have gone to their chosen international university and studied there. As we transition from that and we find a new compromise, one perhaps that involves blended learning, some face-to-face contact, some online delivery as well. I mean, Kurt was talking about earlier about, he was predicting that there would be an increase in online transnational education. I happen to agree with that prediction. I think that probably is going to happen. As to what the answer is in terms of maintaining the student experience, I think I think that is a very, very difficult challenge. I don't think there's a clear answer at the moment. I think blended learning will become a very important part of this. I think flying faculty will help contribute to that. It's, just from, it's a lot easier to send faculty from a university to somewhere in the world to deliver a module or a program than it is to send 30 students from all over the world to the faculty. Just from a climate point of view, that's much better and more sustainable. So we do need to rethink these things. But I think finding international higher education that is not dehumanized, which we could easily go down that route if we're not careful, will be essential to student experience and engagement.
Thanks, Dominic. Professor Natcha, did you want to add anything?
Very good question indeed. Actually, this one is one of the key risks globally about the student health, mental health especially, because now students are online, and this is a very critical issue. So how we can help them? So I would say my 3 things that popping up on my mind is let them find, having fun, and having a focus. So find, fun, and focus. What are they? When we're talking about find, is letting them identify their true values, letting them having self-awareness, setting up clear objective of life, what make them feel happy, and what them feel meaningful to the society, and find out what are their strength is, and that is something to do with find. Fun, of course, university has to find way to let the student do something fun, apart from listening to the lecture and learning online, which is people get tired of being online all the time. So we should find time for them to having fun outside of the computer. So project-based learning is important. So that's why I already mentioned that we try to initiate a number of innovation projects for students to participating. So they could go away from the computer and then come up with drawing, thinking, and analyzing, something that they don't have to really online all the time. And they enjoy it because at the end of the day, it's kind of focused through global common goods, come up to global impacts and something that tangible. They could feel that what they are doing is valuable. For example, during the pandemics, as we know, it's about COVID-19. So we bring our students to engaging in our faculty research and innovation project combating COVID-19. So the students feel valued because what they are doing is somehow will link to local and global impact. So that's why one of our motto, university motto, is innovations for society, both for students and the faculty. And before we can do that, we should help our students to dream about the futures, understanding about the challenges. So this is the reasons why we participating with the UNESCO high-level Future Literacy Summit, which was held in December 2020. And when we talk about future literacy, it's about capabilities. That is part of the future skill that our students should have. Because being future literate enable people to use futures to innovate the present. And this is an inclusive discipline of anticipation that is essential for all of us in today's pandemic world, and this is good for our students. So that's why we participating in this activity. So let our students imagine the futures and be able to think something beyond what they are doing right now. And from that, we do have what we call public-private partnership platforms, or CU Innovation Hub, which is a platform to allow them to experiment their ideas and come up with tangible solution that they have a chance to bring that into global impact. So one of the projects that we do is the startup called Baya Phyto Farm, which is one of the Chula COVID vaccine team. that made locally in Thailand. So our student, undergrad, postgrad, postdocs can participate in that project, as well as many other innovation projects around the campus. So I think this is one of the ways to help our students cope with their mental health, as well as sports. Nowadays we have esports, and this is becoming very, very famous for young generation. They love to play sport online too. They enjoy interacting with other students around the world through games. So yeah, so my conclusion would be, let them find their true values, let them have fun, and lastly, giving them a focus for locally and globally impact, and let them have a chance to be able to enrich their power, inspiring them, and let them have a chance to shine. And failing is okay. Let them learn that failure is common. It is something that we should not punish them for being failed to solving a particular problem, but the most importantly, they must learn to coping with that change, learn to coping with the failure. And that is, I think, one of the ways to help them with the mental health problems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Natcha. Those 3 Fs are, I think, a lasting message in some respects. And I particularly, when you were talking about focus, in fact, it ties in with some of the key themes we were talking about before, about engagement, you know, about the public purpose, even of a private institution, and the broader global or local impact of a partnership. It need not necessarily be the institutional wins, but sometimes that focus, you know, that engagement, the inspiring nature of both a strategic partnership for the students, for all the stakeholders, is that external impact as well. So I think that's a really key message that's come through from a lot of our presenters today. I want to pivot back to Aditya and then to Kurt about something that you alluded to, both Dominic and Professor Natcha, in the sense of employability, in Dominic's words, and then future skills, Professor Natcha, you mentioned. So when it comes, Aditya, to partnerships, how important are these strategic partnerships to the future skill set and employability, both locally and globally, of our students?
A wonderful question, Shaun. And I think the key in today's world is adaptability. It's those institutions and those organizations and those individuals who have the ability to adapt to a constantly changing environment, and those that are able to show resilience really are the ones that would be able to succeed. And I think developing partnerships with institutions that have complementary skills is so important. I think it was Dominic that mentioned this early on in our conversation, that it's complementarity is so important, and we see this a lot within the ACU network. We often have universities from the global north seeking partnerships with universities in the global south, and vice versa, because it's different factors that institutions in different geographies bring to the table. Of course, one common factor which has been a great equalizer, unfortunately, is the COVID pandemic, where the problems being faced by certain countries in certain geographies when it comes to COVID are very similar to the problems being faced by other countries in other geographies. And this whole period, I think, has taught us a lot about future skills, about employability, about the future of work. I don't think any of us thought 2 years ago that it would be possible to get so much formal business done from the confines of one's bedroom. But I think human beings fundamentally, we're adaptable creatures. And I think strategic partnerships help that adaptability, because you're able to learn from colleagues and from partners in different scenarios, but you also are able to understand how similar you are at the core. So it's been a very interesting period for the world, and I think those institutions that can help you and your stakeholders adapt are the strategic partnerships that will last well into the future.
Thanks, Aditya. Kurt, I'll put the same question to you about future skills and employability.
I really like very much what Aditya has mentioned about being able to adapt to a new way of delivering teaching and learning. That is really number one key. And I fully also agree with the digital divide, which we see globally. I mean, some countries, some universities, especially in the north, they have been able to adapt very quickly. Within a few weeks, they were able to deliver good quality online courses, and you would even find a number of universities in India being able to do that. But the fact is that the majority of universities in India and other developed countries, they were not able to deliver online even after several months. So adaptability, being able to total new situation where the focus is not on what the teacher is doing, but how the students can learn. And I think there's a huge learning curve for professors at universities in many countries to be able to deliver quality online. And again, as Dominic also said, blended learning is the key. I mean, I don't think you can, most universities cannot only deliver by online. Some universities are now experiencing with artificial intelligence in order to really adapt the learning to the students' needs. And you have institutions around the world which are really experimenting in that. But that will not be the majority even in the medium term. So I think blended learning is a way of, and I really think partnership comes in where we do have quite a few universities around the world which are now struggling a lot, not only on the teaching and learning, but also actually having the technology present at their universities to be able to deliver good online teaching and learning. And that is definitely what we see in a number of developing countries, but also a lot of activities to really adapt and try to deliver quality online teaching and learning around the globe. And I think partnerships, even South-South or North-South or North-North, will become very important to reach a higher level of standard by universities to be able to use the technology in a blended way, which will really not dehumanize, as Dominic said, the students, and that is a real challenge.
Thank you, Kurt and Aditya. Yeah, I would agree fundamentally that partnerships can play a really important role in that adaptability. I mean, certainly another word we could use and throw around in the context of this pandemic is resilience, both of students and faculty and even institutionally. And that tying back in the theme we were talking about earlier of I guess the greater good in some respects, greater impact outside of institutions can be lifting each other up in terms of, as you alluded to then, Kurt, quality, standard of teaching, knowledge sharing has been another theme here. So it's not just the institutional impact, getting more postgraduate students through pathways and whatnot. It's providing these future-proof skills to our students: adaptability, resilience, of course, technological skill sets and whatnot. But one of the broader themes here of a successful strategic partnerships has certainly been that of alignment of interests, but also public and greater impact and benefit, which I think has been a really interesting theme throughout. I'm conscious of time. We do have to wrap up now, but I want to thank you all once again for your words of wisdom and for bouncing off each other on these themes and questions. And thank you to the audience who have participated through fantastic questions for our panelists and for your attention here today. So thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you through the remainder of the summit.